Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Hope you all had a great weekend. I'll tell you about mine in a second. But we've got some exciting developments. Let's start off with MindSpeak. Very much looking forward to hosting His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, the former President of the Republic of Ghana, 2012 to 2017 at MindSpeak this Saturday. And if you want to get a flavour of what MindSpeak's all about, do take a look at this YouTube link. I've been reading his book, My First Coup d'etat, and I was going through some reviews and I came across this one from the Wall Street Journal. The future arrived suddenly. It's a beautiful lyrical book, I must say. In My First Coup d'etat, John Dramani Mahama offers personal reminiscences of the vast cultural changes that took place in Ghana after independence as old tribal ways died out. Mr. Mahama is at his best in describing this vanished world. He does so with the eye of a historian and the flair of a novelist. My First Coup d'etat is a collection of personal reminiscences centered on the traditional customs of his home village, where every older man is respectfully called a grandfather and every woman a grandmother. Some of the stories are his own, involving one or more of his 18 brothers and sisters. Others were handed down by his father, who came from a long line of tribal chiefs. At times, the lost world he describes seems almost magical, as if it were populated by fairies and demons rather than real people. Many of his tales revolve around tribal practices that no longer exist. One is the teenage courting ritual called Simpa, or full moon dance. Simpa would take place in the village square, when the moon was huge, round, and electric white against the black sky. Villagers would start to sing, the young women would begin to dance seductively, and young men would tap them on the shoulder and ask to join them. As the evening went on under the light of that moon, Mr. Mahama says, people would find partners not only for dancing, but also for life. Really is extraordinary. I came across it, thankfully, in the Mosque library about a week ago, and then Fenici informed me, look, you're going to be speaking to him on Friday night, so I started reading it. And he told me, you must read the story about Ezra. Ezra was the bully. It's how he stood up to him. It's really extraordinary stuff. I'm really impressed. I'm looking forward to Saturday immensely. I was critical for some time about the economic policies. I'm going to have to raise those questions as well. Seeing the totality of the man has given me a very new perspective. And I think, we've got so much to ask about. Gambia, peaceful handover in Ghana, global trends, Africa trends, and I think couldn't be a more opportune moment. So see you at MindSpeak, this time at the law firm. Saturday. Speculators have pared their dollar bets, and also the Trump administration has been talking down the dollar actually, quite aggressively. My piece over the weekend is about global warming, food prices in Laikipia, and on that note, let me put up a photograph of the snow peaks of Mount Kenya elephants in Laikipia at Borana Ranch, and then if you haven't had a chance to see that interview with Ian Craig of Lower Wildlife, do have a listen. Home thoughts. I had an uncle by marriage called Kasu. He was a roly-poly fellow, full of banter, good jokes, sometimes very risque. You would always find yourself chuckling, even before you said hello, like he used to chuckle at his own jokes. A few days ago, my uncle said, let's go and all have dinner at the Mosque Club. I got there early because some folks are teetotalers and one uncle isn't, so he wanted to fuel his tank before everyone arrived. During the main course, Kasu started to feel poorly. The Mosque Club deserved a shout out, but I thought given the demographics, they must have some experience. Yesterday, I went to Kasu's funeral. The place was packed. And as I sat there and I looked at my community, because he was from my community, and it's a very, everyone walks by community and non-community by the body. And it really makes you think when you've seen someone alive and then you've seen him dead. And I couldn't help thinking that life is a very slender, momentary thing. You don't realize how slender and momentary it is until you get older. US would go into any war with China with unparalleled violence, warn experts. The United States would likely win because sending China's untested forces against the might of America's military would be like pitching farmers against Achilles and his warriors, said one. But even a conventional military victory would be a strategic disaster, set off a global economic crisis, and create a potential power vacuum inside defeated China, the like of which we can't imagine. Mr. Bannon said war would erupt in the South China Sea in 5 to 10 years, he said. They're taking their sandbars and making basically stationary aircraft carriers and putting missiles on those. They come here to the United States in front of our face, and you understand how important face is and say it's an ancient territorial sea. I expect a showdown, to be frank. Put up a photograph of a Chinese military parade I found on Twitter. Who supplies the news? Patrick Coburn on misreporting in Syria and Iraq in the London Review of Books. The nadir of Western media coverage of the wars in Iraq and Syria has been the reporting of the siege of East Aleppo, which began in earnest in July and ended in December when Syrian government forces took control of the last rebel-held areas, and more than 100,000 civilians were evacuated. During the bombardment, TV networks and many newspapers appeared to lose interest in whether any given report was true or false, and instead competed with one another to publicize the most eye-catching atrocity story, even when there was little evidence that it had taken place. NBC News reported that more than 40 civilians had been burned alive by government troops, vaguely sourcing the story to the Arab media. Another widely publicized story that made headlines everywhere, from the Daily Express to the New York Times, was that 20 women had committed suicide on the same morning to avoid being raped by the arriving soldiers. The source in this case being a well-known insurgent, Abdullah Othman, in a one-sentence quote given to the Daily Beast. The real reason the reporting of the Syrian conflict has been so inadequate is that Western news organizations have almost entirely outsourced their coverage to the rebel side. Church and mosque side by side in Syria have been that way for centuries, Tim Anderson. Der Spiegel's front cover caught everybody's attention, the decapitation of the Statue of Liberty. Trump, when asked about Putin, says the US isn't so innocent. President Donald Trump said he respects Putin, and when told the Russian leader's a killer, Trump said the United States has many of them. What do you think? Our country's so innocent, he told Fox's Bill O'Reilly in a taped interview aired Sunday on the Super Bowl program show. 5th of December, I wrote a piece, We Have a Deviate Tomahawk, about Putin's intervention in the US election. Michiko Kakutani's startling detail in New York Times story. Trump not fully briefed on order, giving Bannon the National Security Council's seat. 30th of January, I said Bannon has been appointed to the National Security Council. I said the impetus seems to be best explained by Steve Bannon, Trump's chief strategist and counselor. I'm a Leninist, Bannon proudly proclaimed. Lenin wanted to destroy the state, and that's my goal too. I want to bring everything crashing down and destroy all of today's establishment. Bannon has been appointed to the National Security Council. Trump and staff rethink tactics after stumbles. We are moving big and we're moving fast, Mr. Bannon said. When asked about the upheaval of the first 2 weeks, we didn't come here to do small things. But one thing has become apparent to both his allies and his opponents. when it comes to governing speed does not always guarantee success. With most of his belongings in New York, the only family picture on the shelf behind Mr. Trump's desk is a small black and white photograph of his first and only boss, Frederick Christ Trump. Currency markets: euro dollar 107.69, dollar index 99.73, dollar yen 112.63, Swissy 0.9923, the pound 124.90, the Aussie 0.7670, Indian rupee 67.195, so that's improved by one figure. South Korean won 1137.98, the Rial 311.74, Egyptian pound 1847, that's rallied too, and the Rand at 1326.39, probably the high for the year. Dollar index, let me put up a chart, keep 99.50 in mind, that remains the key pivot. The hippies deserved a homogeneous space, Urgel was quoted as saying last year. This is Urgel, who opened a nightclub in Ibiza in the 70s, ignoring financiers who claimed only a small group of hippies wanted to spend time on the Balearic Island. The hippies deserved a homogeneous space, Urgel was quoted as saying last year. While Ibiza's isolation attracted the hippie movement in the 60s and early 70s, the rave movement, coupled with the emergence of venues such as Pasha and Amnesia, later helped the island to become more fashionable within the mainstream. And then I like this, Chef Andre's signature warm foie gras jelly with black truffle coulis. Have a look at that. Commodity markets: gold futures settled on Friday at 1220.80, currently just shy of 1224. Metal climbed 2.5% last week, the biggest gain since June the 10th. Put up a chart of gold, just around 1224. Crude oil, $54.45 in New York, moving higher, but I still think 60 is going to cap it all year. In fact, I think we're quite near the top. Emerging markets: Asia's top performing currencies. Take a look. Asian stocks top an 18-month high. That's from David Inglis. Angola's Dos Santos will not run in 2017 presidential elections. That was largely expected. He'd already chosen his successor, Lourenço, but it remains a very challenged economy. The protests have not gone away, FT about Ethiopia. People are just waiting because they don't want to get into trouble, says Beckham, and nothing is being done to address the roots of the problem. So many people are now fighting back with weapons. Very interesting piece in Asia Times: Guangzhou's Silk Road to Africa. The African Silk Road could be more properly named the Polyester Road. Democracy activist Pastor Evan Mwawire is considered such a threat to Mugabe's Zimbabwe government, he's being confined in a maximum security prison. South African oil share up 3.18% this year. Dollar versus Rand. I've been bullish about the Rand since the beginning of the year. I think we're at a 2017 high for the Rand. Egyptian pound firmer as well, 18.7455. President Muhammadu Buhari will remain in the UK on vacation to complete medical tests, his office said in an email statement. No date of return yet. Nigerian oil share down 3.99% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange up 8.08% this year. African issuers scrutinized after Mozambique's bond default. Investors are wondering who's next in Africa. Bloomberg's sovereign credit risk model, which uses data including budget deficits, foreign reserves, non-performing bank loans, and political instability to calculate default probabilities, flags 4 candidates among African Eurobond issuers: Senegal, Tunisia, Ghana, and Zambia. Mozambique became the first African country to default on dollar bonds since Ivory Coast in 2011, when it failed to settle an almost $60 million coupon initially due in January. Had a 15-day grace period that ended on Thursday. UN OCHA South Sudan: more than 52,600 South Sudanese fled to Uganda in January, primarily from Ye, Morobo, Lainya, and Kejokiji. Connecting the dots, food prices, the weather, and Laikipia was my article over the weekend. A number of stories caught my attention last week. The UN Food and Agricultural Organization said its food price index rose 16.4% from a year before to the highest level since February 2015. Sugar prices jumped 45% from a year before and 10% month on month. Cereal prices hit a 6-month high, with wheat, corn and rice all increasing. Food prices reached an all-time high in 2011, and surely one of the conditions precedent of the Arab Spring. People may vote with their pocketbooks, but more often than not, they revolt with their bellies, says Joshua Keating. If you want to predict where political instability, revolution, coup d'etat, or interstate warfare will occur, the best factor to keep an eye on is not GDP, the Human Development Index, or energy prices. If I were to pick a single indicator, economic, political, social, that I think will tell us more than any other, it would be the price of grain, says Lester Brown, president of the Earth Policy Institute, who has been writing about the politics and economics of food since the 1950s. Interestingly, President Daniel Arap Moi understood this correlation very well, and interventions like Nyayo milk were introduced. In an election year, food prices need to be damped down, otherwise it can metastasize into a big political headwind. Last year was the hottest on record, and is following on a series of hottest years on record. Parched conditions, scorches, yields. It is estimated that 18 of the most 20 affected by climate change countries are in Africa. Famine is threatening Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan and Yemen. The Kenya Red Cross has cranked up its interventions. Reports out of Laikipia last week spoke to a dystopian situation. Reuters reported armed cattle herders have been flooding onto farms and wildlife conservancies in drought-ravaged northern Kenya, leading to violence in which at least 11 people have been killed and a tourist lodge torched. You could argue that Laikipia finds itself in the eye of the storm being a cocktail of global warming, which has reduced available pasture, a surge in livestock plus 76% as per ILRI, exacerbating the situation. The value of cattle has increased dramatically, making it a smart investment for urban elites, a mobile bank account hidden from scrutiny, taxation. ILRI's Joe Ogutu pronounced, at the basis of all this is the human population explosion. According to Tristan McConnell, writing in France 24, last month perhaps 30,000 livestock arrived on Mugi, displacing wildlife. The illegal herders, some armed with spears, others with AK-47s, cut through fences and making off with wire posts. The shooting, looting, poaching and rustling that accompanied them left Perrott despondent. 20 years of time, effort, sweat, money, it's fallen apart in 2 weeks, destroyed. The cause and effect for the current situation is being disputed. County Commissioner Onesmus Kiata said the situation was under control and blamed drought in the region for the tensions. It's a conflict over pasture, he said. Once the rains come, they will leave. Francis Narumbe, a local chief of the Turkana tribe, the drought has been a problem for years, but people have been living peacefully. This flare-up is because of politics. Martin Evans, head of Laikipia's Farmer Association, there's political incitement. The bottom line is that we will need more political will, because it seems to me Laikipia is a laboratory experiment, and where just about everything is colliding. Global food prices are up to a 2-year high, mostly on rising sugar and milk. Take a look at the chart. January inflation clocked 6.99%, the highest since February last year. Food takes up the largest share of that inflationary basket, 36%. Kenya shilling, bit of a bounce, 103.24. Nairobi all share 4-day winning streak, narrowing its 27 loss to minus 6.86%. NSC 20, which is still down 10.16%, but on a 4-day winning streak, up 2.63% over those 4 days. Interesting report in a magazine called Corrective. The 3 seizures, talking about drug seizures off the Kenyan coast, roughly equal the amount captured by 11 East African governments between 1990 and 2009, according to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. This is speaking to the removal of the Akasha brothers, and talk that there's going to be something bigger than just that removal. Once again, thank you for stopping by.